A man chooses, a slave obeys.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
Trolls are the jerks of the gaming world, right? They frustrate players to no end, but why do they do it? Is it because they're a sociopath that lack empathy? Are they just people playing a different game with a different goal that just happens to mess around with other people's games? Are they deeply unhappy people that are just lashing out? And assuming that trolls do what they do for a variety of different reasons, how should we think about the ethics of what they're doing and whether also it's okay to troll the trolls? Our guest today is Dr. Chrissy Cook. She's an expert on trolls in video games, and she may tell us that everything I just said about trolls up to this point is completely wrong, or hopefully lacking in nuance, right? And we definitely want to get some nuance here. Dr. Cook is a Canadian postdoctoral researcher at the National Chengchi University in Taipei, Taiwan. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And she's coming to us from Taipei today. Although her background is in psychometrics and social psychology, for the past 5 years, she's been working in communication science. Her PhD dissertation focused on answering the fundamental questions of trolling in the online gaming context. And that's why she's here. She's the person we want to talk to about trolling in video games. She's interviewed trolls, explored the gaming report function, and run experiments with gamers to figure out who trolls, why, what happens in the aftermath. After spending a year studying content moderation and social media practices, she's now refocused on studying trolling victims. Dr. Cook, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right. So let's just dive right into it. You know, Andy and I, God, I think in our last episode, Andy and I could not even decide what griefing was. What is a troll? How would you define what a troll is?
So to be totally honest with you, this is still a question, even after 5 years of working on this topic. So I have a working definition that I like to use, but I'd be lying if I said that it didn't get its own share of criticism. So other trolling researchers listening today, I know this is not the alpha and omega of trolling, but what I like to use is trolling is the instrumental exploitation of either website, chat, or game mechanics at another person's expense. So okay. The key parts of that, instrumental means trolls do what they do for a reason. It's not just wanton destruction all the time. They get something out of it. Exploitation, there's always some kind of victim. And the mechanics are also important. They're using existing mechanics most of the time in order to do what they do, to troll. So that's my working definition. That's what I use. And I think it encompasses a lot of different areas of trolling, even outside of games. But there is some idea that there might be more to it than that. There could be elements of provocation. So there's provoking in there somewhere. A lot of people will say some people are more keen on the idea of a deception. So there's a couple options in there, but that's what I like to use. That's the core.
Well, since you're our expert here, I think we'll go with yours, right?
Okay.
And it does seem to separate itself from people who are hackers. So this doesn't cover hacking, right? This is existing mechanics, so they're not breaking a game in any way.
Not usually. So to me, and this is something that I guess I have different than a lot of trolling researchers, I don't consider trolling hacking or hacking trolling. I consider once you're hacking, then you're into cybercrime. Then you're doing something that can be illegal. To me, if it's illegal, I hesitate to call it trolling.
Right.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So just out of, and if I buy a hack, right?
Then we're getting into tricky waters. It could be. Yeah, then I would say you could say you're supporting a troll, or you could say you're supporting a hacker, or you could say you are a troll who is using a hacker's device. It depends on your definition, right? It could go a bunch of different ways.
Okay, I was thinking. I always assumed the latter, but awesome. Okay, so you've researched trolls. What are trolls like? I'm asking you. I'm throwing the super big question at you.
So it really depends. There's so much, and I would love to give hard and fast answers here, but I think you're going to find a lot of my answers are going to be it depends, because it's such a big topic. So there's some that are absolutely as malicious as we think they are. However, those ones almost never participate in research. So they're very hard to get a hold of. And these are the ones that, might delve more into the cybercrime area of things. These are the ones that might dox you if you miff them. These are the ones who might find your information, and even if they don't dox you, they use it for their own purposes, this kind of situation. The ones that I talk to and the ones that I've interviewed are actually oddly helpful. I've never interviewed a more eager group of people to talk about what they do, which I found really interesting and unexpected when I started.
As in the sense of, are they a group of people that feel misunderstood and they want you to explain them?
Sometimes I get that. Other times, it's not that they want to be understood so much. It's more that they're happy that someone's trying to. They don't really want you to explain them necessarily. I think they're happy to do that themselves. They just want people to listen. So I also had in the group that I interviewed, I guess I had the distinction that they call themselves trolls too. So they probably are a different breed than the people who are, we would say they troll, but they wouldn't say they troll. So
right.
There's that distinction too.
So in thinking of the majority of trolls, do you think, and I know this is part of the difficulty of research, right? Because you can only talk to, maybe since now you're doing research on victims, maybe that's a way of getting through it from the other direction, right? But yeah, there's definitely a limitation of research that you can only talk to people who will talk to you. But do you get the sense that most trolls do self-identify, or that they don't identify? They think they would be wrongly mislabeled trolled?
I think it depends on what they do in terms of trolling. I think in games, since this is the ethics in video games, in games, they mostly self-identify. I think most trolls know that they're trolls and would identify as trolls in games. The ones that you may not get troll, or they may not call themselves trolls so much, are more in the political sphere.
Right. Sure.
Because then it can be a job, depending on which government you're working for or which agency.
Right.
But I'd say the ones in games, like, you get the classic archetypes, the trickster type. If you go back to Julian Dibble back in '93, you have the rape in cyberspace, they call it. So you go to the tricksters, or the ones who are masters of the lore. They send noobs out to the Valley of Death in Old Asheron's Call, for the 5 people listening who know that game. Andy
knows.
Yeah, there you go.
I do.
So you send the level 5 out to VOD and watch them get killed, and you have that more. They know what they're doing at that point. In games,
right? They've become masters of this game, and this is the way they show their mastery. Exactly.
That's quite common in the gaming context.
Can we talk about motivation? So it's interesting because part of me, like, since you mentioned the political thing, let me take a quick digression, and we'll come back to this. Because I can see what some people might call for trolls, but for a political cause, might say, look, there are values that are pushing me. I am essentially an agent of chaos, but for justice, right? Do you get something like that in games where people are passionate enough about the games, where they feel that way about the games that they troll?
Absolutely. Interestingly, all of the women trolls that I've interviewed fit into that category.
Really?
Yeah. So the number one motivation for female trolls, now granted, tiny sample size here. There were very few in comparison to the male trolls. To at least that you can get a hold of. But they fall under what I would call the vigilante troll archetype. So they troll those who troll them first. So the motivation is revenge and to sort of clean up the platform, whatever game it was. I believe both the female trolls played League of Legends in the sample that I had.
Okay.
So they wanted to give them a taste of their own medicine, and they wouldn't troll anyone who didn't troll them first.
Right.
So you get that. You also have people who have some kind of ideology. You get that definitely more in the political sphere. But in game trolls, you do get that as well.
Do you get like game trolls bringing political ideology into the game and exercising that in the game as part of their trolling?
Sometimes, yeah. Although usually in games, it's usually done in a more sort of playful way. You do get trolls who bring in their political and their just social ideologies as well. That's not the type of trolling I research. For those who are interested in that kind of trolling, Dr. Kishana Gray is an excellent resource. She does a lot of race-based trolling and toxicity in games. I think she has a couple books out on that now.
Cool.
But I don't focus on that kind. So I focus on more general topics of trolling. But in terms of bringing political, the stuff that I've seen in my own research, during the initial Trump election period, it was very popular in CSGO, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, to have Americans have a username of Donald Trump and someone else will have a username of Vladimir Putin, and they completely ignore the game and just role play these two people in the game.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so that was kind of a fad, I get the impression, for a time in CSGO.
So were they trolling the other players in doing this, or?
They were trolling everybody. They were trolling each other. They were trolling the other players. They were just essentially ignoring the game and just living out this political role play in usually a very silly way.
Right.
But it was annoying to the other players.
Oh, it was annoying. And I was going to ask, is it not just entertaining to the other players? I would think I would be entertained by that. But
yeah, I think it's probably a mix.
Well, it
probably
depends.
A mix.
If someone's in your squad and they're not, and they're not doing their part, and you're losing, right? That might affect you. Again, or if you're winning and it's just a side, it's some interesting thing that makes the game more fun. It's interesting, right? Notice the person we're calling the troll could potentially be doing the same thing, but with different results. So I guess, Chrissy, part of the thing that's making someone a troll, right, was the intention,
yes,
right, to do it. So I guess in this case, if you're playing as Putin or Trump, even if you're fun, if your intention was to mess up other people's games, you're still trolling.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yeah, it can go so many different ways. But I would say what Andy was saying, it's going to be a mix. There are some people who are going to be entertained by it. And you get that outside of games too. Like Ken M is one of the most famous trolls of all time in the social media world. And there are people who think he's hilarious, posting these totally ridiculous non sequitur captions and images, and other people who get super annoyed and who will comment and flame him, be like, why are you doing this? Why are you so stupid? But that's the joke, right? So you get that in games too. I think you touched on an interesting point, though, that CSGO is a competitive game. So you really need everyone to be participating on your team in order to win. and winning is a thing in this game.
And that's what most people play the game for.
Exactly.
Most people don't play the game for political theater.
No. I mean, hey, there's probably a niche market out there, but vast majority are in there to win, to get their team winning. So Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Though it's interesting, what if, if most people play it for a different purpose? I remember I had a student that was talking about one of the Final Fantasy games in some sort of multiplayer mode, where essentially he said the only people that were still having fun there were the trolls. And he thought the trolls were the only ones really playing the game well.
Interesting.
Because what's the point of the game, right? So no, if the point is to win, right? But if the point is no longer to win, and if there's no good win conditions, maybe the point is to have fun, and they were the ones having fun.
I can absolutely see that. And I've been fortunate in my life to live in many different areas of the world. And I found that there was a real gaming distinction between when I lived in North America and when I lived in Europe. And in North America, games, you could play them casually, even if they were a competitive game. I used to play, League of Legends, some of these esports titles. I was never any good, but I never had the intention of being any good. I played because it's a game and I want to have fun. And when I went to Europe, I found that was less of a thing. It was
really,
yeah. You really didn't. If you played an esports title, you played it to be good at the game, and you played it to win, and you played it to be competitive. And I thought that was. I don't know how much of that was a cultural difference, or how much of it was just I hung out with a lot of esports guys. I don't know. Right. It could be just my experience. Sample size, very important.
Representation.
Yeah, I have seen both of those attitudes on display in like Magic the Gathering tournament sort of play, right? Whether Friday Night Magic, is that meant to be casual or is that meant to be? And so, some people take it more casually and some people take it more competitively.
Absolutely, I would absolutely be a casual Magic player as well, but I would also never go to Friday Night Magic because I'd be too scared of ruining someone's time who was competitive. So you get a lot of these kind of individual game cultures, and then you add on to that the regional server cultures, and then you get a lot of mixing going on, so you get a lot of different kind of settings. And coming back to trolling, I do find that trolling was often taken worse in Europe than it was in North America. It seemed to have a more, now this is anecdotal, this is not research,
right?
But my friends in Europe seemed to have a harder time with it, or got more annoyed by it than my friends in North America did.
It's interesting. My first impression is we've gotten used in the U.S. to a confrontational, divisive society, where maybe there's still more social cohesion in Europe. That is a possibility. But going back, it just seems that, this idea of, I'm thinking back to the CSO example that you gave, the CSGO, right? Where, it seems that the more competitive people are, the more they're there to win, the less they have patience for someone who's just there to have fun, and having fun might involve, poking at people. But what if you're like, I'm just here to have fun and you guys are playing a different game, and my trolling consists of just trying to have fun, which I know annoys you guys?
That you've just described my husband. This is why we don't play games together.
Is your husband, are you married to a troll?
I am, absolutely.
You are?
Oh, definitely.
Self-avowed?
More me avowed, but to be fair to him.
Bride of the troll.
Oh, true. Yes, I am the troll bride. I don't have the fancy hair. Someday I'll do the whole Cruella look, but
yes, nice.
But wow. Yeah, no. So he absolutely would fall under that, where he trolls to have fun in these competitive games. And I do want to give you a counter example of trolling. I believe this was from WoW, and it's to date my favorite gaming troll example. It's from my original interviews that I did back in 2018, I think. And he described a time where in WoW, I guess people, I never played WoW. I kind of, my MMO days ended before WoW became a thing. But there was a time when it was very common to just leave your character AFK. So your character would just be standing there while you went and did whatever it is you were doing offline.
Mm-hmm.
And so this troll that I interviewed, he would go and he would push characters off of cliffs who were AFK. So he would just kind of like force the avatar off the cliff and they would fall. And so when they came to, they were suddenly in the ocean, or their character would respawn, or whatever the case would be. And apparently a lot of people found this hilarious. And so they would join in when they came back. So eventually they basically had this giant conga line of trolls pushing people off cliffs in WoW. And this was their trolling. This was their big troll escapade. Was pushing AFK people off cliffs in WoW.
That sounds fun, and you're adding a dimension. You know, I mean, look, part of what we were talking before, before we started the episode, Andy and I were talking about this idea that, different kind of trolls, because trolling just seems right off the bat super wrong, right? But why? And we were talking about how different kind of trolling might be wrong for different reasons, and maybe not always wrong, depending on, the projected outcome or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
And here we seem to have maybe an example of, that definitely sounds like trolling. But it seems to have added a nice, fun dimension to people.
Absolutely.
Right? To the game.
I think the key here is that it wasn't in CSGO. It was in an MMO.
Right.
And
the context is very different.
It's hugely different, because MMOs are competitive, you could say, but more in a PvE, unless you're on oh gosh, it's been so long, I can't remember the term.
Raids.
Yes.
Right. I forget what it was in EverQuest. It had a different name then, but I've forgotten what it is.
Right, sure. You're going on raids, but there's the big social aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it's not like you're going to forever win any one of these quests or raids, right?
Right. But in that situation, you have teammates who are counting on you to be there, and the raids are quite difficult. Right. And you could, I guess one of the, it turned out to be false, but the whole, it was super famous.
Leroy Jenkins.
Leroy Jenkins, thank you.
Yes.
Would have been, when it first came up, we all thought it was, we thought it was real. We thought it was some guy who just got involved in one of these raids and then decided to just completely blow it for everybody.
Who is Leroy Jenkins?
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know this. Yep.
Okay, Leroy Jenkins was, again, we know now that it was it's one of the earliest instances of trolling, although not for the reason we thought it was.
Right.
Okay. So it actually was more of a bait and switch. But it was this guy on a raid, and the opening scene, you have the guild master talking to one of his members of the guild who's calculating their percentage of success. I think it was 33% or something. And they were going on and they were having this big discussion, and Leroy Jenkins, the character, he's another character in this guild. He appears to be AFK. And then suddenly he goes, "Time's up, let's do this." And then screams, "Leroy Jenkins," and runs into the raid. And everyone else is like, oh no, save him, more colorful language. And they run in and everyone dies. And they're like, "Oh, Leroy, you suck. Why'd you do that?" And his famous final line is, "Well, at least I've got chicken." And that's end scene. Okay. Close curtains. So we later learned this was staged. But at the time we thought it was just some dude who was AFK getting his chicken, right? And then decides he's going to have his epic hero moment and ruins it for everybody.
Right.
Yeah, it was very believable.
It was.
It was an enormously believable staged event.
Cool. Yeah. Right. Okay, so we got this difference between the raids, obviously, where people are counting on you, and just let's say regular playtime, right? It's something like WoW, where the troll, you're doing the same thing for the same reason, but you might have very, very different impacts.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get to the impact a little bit. So right now you're looking at trolling victims, right? So if we're going to talk about the morality of trolling, And, first of all, so we need some sort of idea. What is the actual impact on victims? So maybe, first of all, what is a victim of trolling?
So a victim of trolling is, at the very basic level, anyone who is exploited, or in my definition that I use, is at the expense of part of the trolling definition. Mm-hmm. So these are people who have been impacted in some way or used in some way by the troll. So this is the newbie you send off to the super high level area for your own entertainment. This is the person you flamed, who was the target of your flames. So this is a person who you have used or targeted in some way in order to carry out your troll.
How do most people deal with being trolled? Honestly, as you're looking at these victims, how do they deal with it?
Honestly, we don't know yet, and I think that's a huge issue. So again, if you look at Dr. Gray's work, Shauna Gray, she focuses on that a lot more, but the type of trolling that she looks at often has a very racial element or a very sexist element specifically. So in that case, you really get the same results as you would with offline racism or sexism. You're getting pretty up to very severe anxiety, depression symptoms. You get identity crisis in some cases. You're getting these very, very severe symptoms because racism and sexism are horrible no matter where they happen.
Right.
When you don't have those elements, when it's the more playful kind of trolling, or when it's maybe more political ideology kind of trolling, we really don't know, because a lot of the research in that world borrows from cyberbullying. So a lot of people we have this basic assumption that it's going to be similar to cyberbullying, but there's actually not a lot of studies that look at victims without looking at them through a specific lens. So either through feminism literature or critical race theory, or through some kind of theoretical lens. Yeah, I would say. So right now we think that it's anxiety kind of issues. We know we get people who stop playing the games. That's one consequence, just leaving. You get people who become trolls themselves because they see that that's how it goes in this game. That's how this community works. So they turn into trolls themselves. You get all the same kind of coping strategies and the same kind of consequences that you would with cyberbullying so far. I'm hoping to add a little more nuance to that in future studies and in this postdoc. But yeah, I would say that's our understanding right now of what victims experience. That's interesting. It's interesting to think about how different talking about race and sex, core aspects of your identity. I'm assuming religion, if it was easier, too. Right, would fall into that, right? These core aspects of your identity that, we're all so sensitive about can be so different than, you messed up my CSGO match. We've talked about these things in kind of, laughable terms up to this point. Yeah.
But to be harassed because you're a woman in a game relentlessly, right, can obviously be a very, very different type of situation. Absolutely.
Yeah. I haven't looked at that as much specifically in my own work, but I know there's lots of work out there that definitely looks at that.
Are there trolls? So is this, let's say, going after the, I don't know if I should say more personal stuff or more hardcore identity stuff? Is that something that some sort of specific subsets of trolls do? Or is this just kind of part of general trolling activity?
I think it could be and it could not be. I think for some trolls, they specifically target certain people. There are definitely trolls who will only target women, or who will only target a certain religious group, or LGBTQ members, or Black people, or Jewish people, or whatever the case may be. There are people like that who have specific targets in mind. However, I do think it bleeds into the more general, even the more playful side sometimes too. I mean, the classic, go make me a sandwich, that I think almost every woman on the internet has heard at least once, if not more than once.
Right.
So it bleeds in. I'd say there's both there. And then there are some trolls who absolutely would never touch those subjects with a 10-foot pole, who are purely there to make conga lines and wow, like
Right.
you have a lot of variety within trolling behaviors and types.
And I suspect that really harmful identity-based trolling harms not only the person who's the target, but it also affects nearby people, right?
Absolutely.
People who are not necessarily the directed target, but who share something with the target, and it's meant to, I suspect.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these identity-based trolls, that they have an ideology they want to push. They want people to agree with their trolling. You get the same with political, although some people political is very much a part of their identity, and some people it's not. But you have this same idea of pushing an idea that you believe something is wrong or right. Coming really into ethics and morality, you really believe what you're saying in some cases.
So Chrissy, if we take the example you gave of go make me a sandwich, right?
Yeah.
Is that the sort of thing that you think someone is pushing an ideology, or just they're just looking for whatever will piss you off?
I'd say the latter in that case. That's pretty tame as far as trolls go. There are definitely some women who are going to respond to that more more emotionally than others, though, depending on your own life history, where you're from, what you do, that kind of thing. But that one, I've rarely seen that one be intended as a real jab, that one's usually more playful. The ones, the sexist trolling can get a lot worse than that. And when it enters into the world of sexual harassment, then we're getting into the real identity-based
right.
stuff.
And it doesn't take long for it to get to that level.
No, it really doesn't.
Like there's no slow ramp up to that. It's like, boom, you're there.
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah.
Though it's interesting, right? Because you were talking about, at least what I got is kind of like how some people draw lines.
Yes.
Right. I some trolls are going to say, look, I'm going to mess things up in this way, but there are certain places I don't go. I don't go, let's say, to race and sex. Right.
Yeah.
But go make me a sandwich might be a little bit of fun that I'm having, messing with someone, even though it's not yet sexist, or it's sexist. Sorry, let me be very clear. It's sexist, but it's not yet, let's say, my line for what is really sexist, right? Do you see a lot of indication that if people who, let's say, identify as trolls, that they have kind of lines of morality of what is okay and what is not okay to do?
I think the ones that I interviewed certainly did. Again, these are not going to be the most hardcore, and I'll be the first to admit that. It is people who are willing to participate in research. But I would say most of them did. Where those lines were drawn differed pretty dramatically between the individuals. So you had some people who really, they only trolled other trolls, and that was their whole trolling identity. So it was a very protective, defensive kind of thing for them.
Is that even a troll? I mean,
that depends on, based on the definition I use. Yes, it is, because the behavior is still trolling. Even your intention is to mess with that person, and you are using the person who trolled you, and you're exploiting a mechanism in order to mess with them.
Even if your ultimate justification for this, or your ultimate intention might be to bring justice to the world or rid the game of this pestilence, but you're still acting from the immediate joy that you're getting from just trolling.
Yeah. And even if it's not, even if you aren't enjoying it specifically, you're using the same method.
Right.
It's the same methodology. But I did have at least one participant. Now, I didn't go into this hugely in the actual article, but I do remember one participant who talked pretty extensively about Gamergate, for example. And I think that's an interesting one when you're talking about drawing lines, because for him, when I talked to Anita Sarkeesian, had crossed a line in his mind. So for him, participation in Gamergate type activities was actually for the greater good.
Right.
So in his mind, it was to protect the community that he had that was being attacked by this feminist woman.
That's a great example, and yeah, that's what I was thinking with the political analogy, kind of in the beginning, right? Here he is. I mean, he's protecting gaming from this outside invader that wants to ruin games.
Right, but he's protecting a very specific. Just to make sure that our listeners don't think that we're actually defending this.
Yes, please.
He's protecting a very specific and skewed view of what gaming is. That is all male and probably all white, and doesn't include anybody that sits outside of the circle.
Or maybe thought that Gaming Great really was about ethics and journalism, and whatever that was. But notice, right, this idea of whether, speaking from a moral perspective, right? So, notice from a moral perspective, we can say somebody like that, might come from a place where they're not exercising, let's say, sufficient empathy and understanding. Maybe they've got some facts wrong. But you still want to say that, at least they're coming from a good place in the sense of, they're taking someone that they love, something they love, and protecting it. Right? Not as bad as someone who's just trying to destroy things and mess around with people's fun.
Yeah, and I did find myself. It was a very interesting conversation. Like I said, I also want to be clear, not at all defending Gamergate, but it was an interesting kind of thought experiment, I guess. When I was listening to him talk, for him it was he really felt like he was defending his community. So yeah, you get such a huge spectrum when it comes to trolls and trolling and their motivations for doing it. We can kind of put them in little blocks, but even within the blocks, it can differ dramatically. So like in this case, he would probably fall under kind of an ideological troll in many ways. At least he wasn't just Gamergate, but for this specific part of his trolling career, so to speak. He would fall under this ideological category, but if super different than someone who's trying to influence a political outcome, or super different from someone who is a vigilante troll who's trying to take down other trolls, but they all fall under this kind of ideological category. And the same with personal enjoyment. You have some people who absolutely, there's been tons of personality research that shows that trolls tend to score really high on sadism scales, or at least higher than the average person.
Shocking. Yes.
I know, what a surprise. So yeah, trolls tend to score higher on sadism than the average person. So there are some people who, in the personal enjoyment category of motivation, they're really going to be getting off on seeing people have a miserable time.
Right.
And what they want is for the person to get mad at them and try to flame them or something. That's where they get their personal enjoyment. But then you have other people in the personal enjoyment category who think the game is boring and they're just trying to shake things up. And I've even heard of one guy, he made his best friend through trolling. He trolled the guy. The guy thought it was funny. They started talking, and now, like 15 years later, they're still buddies. So, and that's all within personal enjoyment. So you have very sadistic and very pro-social within
Right.
the same category.
So, and we already have, one example of maybe the game, trolling making games more interesting with the
Yeah.
right from WoW.
yeah.
All right. So sometimes it does happen. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about the games themselves. What do you think is the impact on trolling on games? And I realize games is a really big category.
It is a big category. So I think it can have a lot of different impacts. I think the most obvious impact is there is a subset of gamers that is going to leave, and they're just not going to play the game when they see that it has a really trolly community.
Do you have any sense of how big that is?
I get that it's a relatively small percentage overall.
Okay.
There are no prevalence statistics that I'm aware of, or if there are, they're America specific. The only prevalence statistics I've seen have been in the States. The big ADL, I think, is one, or the Anti-Defamation League. I think that's what it's called.
Anti-Defamation League. Yeah.
That's the one. I only ever see ADL, so I always forget what the full version is. But yeah, so I think they have some studies out. Pew recently did a study on cancel culture, which is kind of tangentially related, but there aren't a lot of prevalence statistics. And if they do exist, usually they're owned by the game companies themselves. And game company data is notoriously difficult to get a hold of.
Right.
As a researcher.
Sure.
But my impression would be that it's a relatively small proportion. However, I think if you go into the specific communities, so if you're going into LGBTQ, different racial groups, different religious groups, I think it will probably rise.
Sure.
Yeah.
People who simply leave because they don't want to deal with it. Fair play. I 100% understand where you're coming from there.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that makes total sense. But in the general population, if you just take everyone all together, I think the numbers of just leaving are still pretty low. In terms of other impact that it could have on the games themselves, you often will get new modes. So I found that I used to play Overwatch, and when people started getting these, what they would call troll comps, where basically you all play the same character, and it just becomes this sort of this very specific play style that everyone does, either to have fun or because it's broken, where it's just you can't beat this composition.
Oh, I see.
It can be either way. It can be broken or it can just be silly, and you get these kind of sort of way of playing. Eventually, Overwatch changed and everyone had to be a different character. But then they created a new mode where it was all the same character mode. And then people who wanted to play like that could go like that. So I do think in some cases it can drive a little bit of creativity on the part of the designers, because the game players are making their own ways of playing. They're trying to break the game in some way. It's why, especially esports titles. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. As a game designer, we find that all the time, right? People play the games way differently than we expect them to play the games. And so in some cases, it makes sense to just follow the fun and go, all right, here's some people having fun playing the game in a way that's very different than we anticipated. It's making the game unfun for other people, but it's fun for them. So let's go ahead and just make a mode where they can play this way with people who like to play this way and not bother the other people who don't want to play this game.
Exactly. And that's also, I think it was WoW who did this, I'm not sure, but there have also been troll servers where you basically get everyone who's been reported for trolling or cheating, and you put them on the same server together and let the chaos fly. So that's also been historically a way to deal with trolls. Instead of creating a new mode, just create a new server for them.
Does that work? Because it seems if I was a troll and they put me, I would just go somewhere else, because what's the point? I can't troll anybody there.
I get the impression that happens a lot. I haven't seen any studies on that specifically. But Yeah, I think once they figure out what's gone wrong, basically, they'll create a new account and go back to the real world, so to speak.
Okay.
Wow.
What about this? I've never actually reported a troll. What happens if I report a troll?
Oh man, that's company. That depends on the company. Some companies are much more proactive about that than others. So sometimes the honest answer is nothing. Sometimes nothing happens. It's like pressing the crosswalk button. It's just to make you feel better. It's not going to speed up the lights, you know. It's very much a placebo thing in some games. Other games, they've got a lot of different systems. So I know probably the most well-known would be the League of Legends Tribunal system, which is it's not in play anymore. They don't use it anymore. But at the beginning, once you hit a certain level in game, you could join the Tribunal. And what would happen is people who got reported enough times. So if you got reported once, it was rare that you'd end up at the Tribunal. But if you got reported 2-3 times, especially for the same offense, the game would put together sort of a case file for you, which would then get sent to the Tribunal, and a group of high-level players would review these cases. They would see the chat logs, and they would see the reason for why you got reported, and they would see the in-game statistics, so how well you played, basically, and they would decide whether or not this person deserved to be punished for what they did. And if they said yes, then the game company would issue usually a temporary ban, sometimes a full ban if it was severe enough. And then sometimes if they said no, then the person would just be ignored. Nothing would happen to them. Nowadays, I believe all reports go directly to Riot Games at this point, if I understand the new system correctly. And I believe they have a specific team of people that deals with reports.
And they look at it, and they look at every one.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. But if you talk to people who play the game, it sure doesn't seem that way. It seems like the reports, nothing happens. So it can vary a lot. And then other games will issue automatic bans, I've heard, have become a thing if they target, if you get racist or sexist language.
Yep.
So they have basically like an advanced chat filter, essentially. Well, not that a profanity filter is that advanced, but they detect it immediately. And if you detect that, you get kicked and you're out of the game immediately. So it really depends on the company and their own policies, exactly how reports are dealt with. But across the board with gamers, most people find them to be ineffective. They're not doing their job well enough.
Because frequently there's no feedback at all. Like you have to just notice that the person you reported is no longer around. There's no reporting back to the person who reported. And so games are all about feedback. And so when they don't get that sort of feedback within a game situation, it looks like something's broken. Even if it's actually working as planned, it looks broken because you're expecting feedback because you're playing a game, and games always provide feedback for everything. So what about reporting as a trolling behavior?
We do see that. We cover that in a study we recently presented talking about prevalence in reporting. It's not super common, thankfully, but I think probably, again, we're getting that research bias where the people who would participate in research, probably not the same people who would report for the lulz. But you do definitely get that, where you have fake reports, often threatening to report, I would say is more common than actually pushing the button at the end of the game. You know, if you don't do this, I'm going to report you. If you don't stop doing this, I'm going to report you. And often, at least from what I've seen, often that has to do with gameplay. So it's usually, you suck at this game. If you don't get better, I'm going to report you. Which, interestingly, in some games you can. And they have a specific category for that called unskilled play. So if they use that, then I believe that's only supposed to affect the matchmaking. if you use that.
Okay.
That's
That's interesting.
This is if you're let's say you can intentionally play poorly to mess up your team.
So then there's different categories for that.
Okay. Right.
Then there's other categories that are more specific.
Okay.
So then you can say, okay, this person is purposely dying, or they're inting, or they're doing something specific that's not letting, or kill stealing, probably the most popular one. So you have these more specific categories, but unskilled play is really, originally the intention was it's supposed to be for people who are not playing in the correct skill level, who are somehow got matched into this way tougher group of people, for example.
Right. And the only way to really know that is to have players tell you.
Exactly.
Right. And the player who's unskilled just doesn't necessarily know it. Somebody else. And it's not necessarily an anger thing or even you've ruined my game thing. It's like, wait a minute, you're in the wrong place. You need to go back. You need to go back to remedial play.
Exactly.
Let me ask both of you guys, because do you feel like, God, it's hard to ask because we're talking. I mean, I knew this would happen when we came in. We invited you, Chrissy. That we're talking about trolls, but of course we keep talking about, and then there's this kind of troll, and this kind of troll, and this kind of troll, and none of these categories are really hard, hard categories, right? Because people move in between them. But what do you think would be realistic justice in games, given the existence of trolls? Because when Andy talks about you never hear what happens, that's a really good point. That could be the feeling of injustice, right? Because I never find out that the person that wronged me got punished. I'm curious what both of you think would be kind of appropriate, the just way to deal with trolls.
That is a tough question. So I can really only speak from personal at this point. I don't think there's any research that can really 100% talk about this in its entirety without missing out parts,
I don't even know if research can answer this question. This is a justice question. Statistics are not going to help you. Statistics might tell you what people think, right? This is kind of.
I'm not even talking quant.
Yeah. This is just quality. I mean, and even if we got qualitative research on this, the question of justice is just, what do you guys think is fair?
I'm a real believer in something that I can't remember the academic name of, but it's the idea of justice where the two parties can come together and come to an agreement. So it's not really punitive so much. There might be a punitive element, but it's where you get the apology.
Right. So this is the reconciliation.
Thank you. The reconciliatory.
Right.
Yes.
So reconciliatory justice, right? But the whole point is, it's not to punish. It's not to create a better society. It's to create a healthier community.
Yes.
Right. Well, that's the idea. And if there's ever a community, the gaming community would definitely be a community that would fit in.
Exactly. So especially in the context of games, I think if you're exiting games, the question gets bigger.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about political, religious, you're talking about a lot of things, and these exist in games too, but games are fundamentally a community, a gaming community. So I think the ideal would be some form of reconciliatory justice where, one person gets their apology, they get that feedback that they're wanting, there's an opportunity to talk, and there is appropriate punishment for what's happened. Maybe not the ban hammer. Maybe it's something. Maybe you can't purchase skins in the game. I don't know, and this would of course depend on the severity of what they did.
Right.
But I also know that there are gamers who that's never going to be an option for them. That's not what they want.
Right.
And
as victims or as trolls?
Both.
Okay.
Both. There's going to be people who don't want to forgive or don't think the person deserves forgiveness on the victim's side for whatever they did. and there's going to be people who do not care about what they did to their victim, and they don't want to hear what they have to say or what they think.
I want to say, and I don't know if this is right, that maybe in this case, games are different than society, or at least the perception of what people are doing. Because, and I can't believe I can't remember the sort of justice that you're talking about. But it originally comes from Nelson Mandela in the South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And in that context, bringing the South African community together after apartheid was such a big deal. And I think people from every side could understand, the interest and humanity of the people that they were talking to. And they were talking to them in the real world. In the game world, on the one hand, it's just a game if you're looking at it that way, right? And on the other hand, and it's all anonymous, and I'm never going to see these people. And they say we're a community, we got to live together, blah, 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 cry me a river. I'm just here having fun, screw those people. So it seems to me that the same incentive, it just doesn't exist in the way it kind of does in my son's school where, if two kids get in a fight, they put them in that circle where, one of them is going to end up apologizing. That's a very good way to move ahead.
I think that we're getting into a world now where we're getting booted from Fortnite. That's a big deal if everybody in your class is playing Fortnite.
Mm.
So, it may not be much to an adult, but a lot of these people are kids, and they're learning the social rules as they go.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's true. Though, I mean, for every game you've got, with each game being its own ecosystem, you can move on to another game. Though, I mean, you're right. I mean, your friends are playing one thing and you're not there.
Right. If you're not part of the social group, you're out. You're outside of it.
Chrissy, so let me piggyback on what Andy just said. In your research of trolls, what about the sociability of trolls when it comes to friends and stuff? Do trolls troll with other trolls? Are trolls like lonely, hateful individuals, or are they people with regular friends and social life? How does that part work?
So a lot of them are shockingly normal. They're very just average people. They've got friends offline. They've got friends online. They're very normal. They're really just people, which in some ways is very humanizing, in some ways very horrifying, because it means we all have the potential. We all could be, it's not like these are evil villains. You're not fighting the Joker. You're not fighting.
I do want to add that you did say earlier that there is a rather high degree of sadism.
Yes.
In there.
Yeah, they do have that, but it's not clinical. It's not at the level where it's like psychopathic.
Right. Okay.
That's a different kind of person.
Right.
then we're talking asylums, but yeah.
So let me ask you this, right? The sense of justice, right? Part of me just feels like, God, it's so hard to do this. It's so hard to. It seems like trolling is never going to go away. It's a complex phenomenon. Game companies have a hard time dealing with it. Do we need more troll hunters? Do we need is this like a kind of thing that does justice demands that more people troll the trolls, or is this just a really bad idea? Is this like a vigilante troll sphere that we just really don't want?
So, I mean, there can only be one Batman. I think if we get too many Batmans, we're going to have a bigger issue.
I mean, clearly not. There's many cities. There's many metropolis, right? There could be many Batmans, right?
Exactly. I guess Batman himself would be Batman.
Right.
Bat people. I don't know.
Sure.
And I say this jokingly. I do think in some cases, vigilante trolling could theoretically work. It could. I don't know a system where it would. I think the methods are too close. And I think the real problem, though, for me, the real problem is the social norm. We accept trolling, and we think it happens all the time. And we're right, it does happen a lot. But it has become almost a rite of passage at this point, where everyone's been trolled at least once.
Right.
You know, it's a common experience, and it's, I call it in my work, unless we're getting into the racism, sexism, gender identity, this kind of trolling where I would argue that's hate speech and cybercrime. And apart from that, trolling is anormative. It's not encouraged, but it's not really discouraged either. It's kind of in this middle ground. So I think if we have vigilante trolls, it's only adding to the social norm that this is a thing to do, and this is what we need to do, and this is the only way to deal with it. Do I have a better answer at this point? Not really. Education, slowly changing the social norm over time. But I think the key message is, for me, is that you don't need to be a troll hunter, but we all should recognize that who we are online is also who we are. And who we affect online are real people. And I think just that really simple fact, or maybe it's simple to me, maybe it's more complex if you're in a different field or whatever the case may be, but we're all real people, and the online world is part of the world. It's all real.
It's a simple fact that's just sometimes hard to get, empathy when when things are anonymous and when you don't see the people in front of you. I thought that was a great answer, Chrissy.
Yeah, I do too.
And you think about how norms have been changing, especially with sex and race, and you would figure that. I guess I want to throw one more question at maybe both of you guys. Do you think that game companies could do any more to help those norms change?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't. I have been toying with. This is for basically any sort of social where there's chat and where there's ability to post videos and that sort of thing. I've been toying with a schema to try to address it. I don't know if it's any good, and what I really need is I need to talk to people like Dr. Gray. And run it by her and others and other people who really have studied this to say, is this even going to hurt or help, right? But yeah, I do believe that there's probably a way to create systems of interaction that promote the good kinds of interactions and demote the bad kinds of interactions.
I would agree with that. I think I do not have an answer. I'm not the game designer, right. But I do think there must be a way. We have years and years of psychology to suggest that we can change behavior.
Of course,
right. So there has to be something that we can do. Maybe, just off the top of my head, maybe have an interaction tutorial to go with your gameplay tutorial. Even something really small like that could potentially.
Yeah, who knows whether anybody's ever actually sat down and told a player, well, this is how you interact with people online.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, guys. I think on this we'll call it an episode. Hey, Chrissy, I don't know if you, Andy and I have a closing that we tend to do. Instead of good game, we say good podcast, GP.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, good podcast, Andy.
A very good podcast. Thank you, Ms. Cook.
No problem. Good podcast, guys.
GP.
GP.
Play nice, everybody.